Crafters Big D here, and this week we are building a terrain board. Specifically, we're doing some Nurgle Swamp. Be right back. Hey crafters, so I've done a couple kill team boards in the past and I've realized they're kind of over engineered. And that's mainly because they've changed how board sizes work in 9th edition. Your kill team board is basically a portion of a board. 2 kill teams board equal the kind of board you would use for 1,000 points or less in 40k. 4 of them would be what you use for 2,000 and less. 6 of them would be 3,000. So having a standalone single kill team board, well, cool. They're not as modular, and now that they're much more of a modular size, I wanted to tackle making a board that you could use for a kill team, or you could duplicate and make 2 of them and do a 1,000 point or a 500 point Warhammer game, or you can make 4 of them and do 2,000 points. Just kind of a modular thing that makes it a little bit more wieldy. And you can see it behind me. I'm going to explain how it works. It's real simple, it's real fast, it's really easy, and really sturdy. A lot of what we go for. It's also pretty darn cheap. So let's set things up over there and hit the table. Okay, crafters. So the first thing making these boards, we get an all new process. I know we've done those wooden surrounded boards before, but the problem with those is that they're really great if you're just using for kill team or just for Warcry, but they're not very modular as if you want to do like a big board. And now that Warhammer has moved to that being a section of board, we can forego the frame and just go with a nice heavy duty piece of 1-inch foam to make our boards. So I've got 2 of them here, so we can make a 1,000 point or less Warhammer board or 2 Warcry kill team boards. And you could make 4 of them very easily and have up to a 2,000 point game. Make 6 of them and you can have a board for a 3,000 point game. So process will be the same for all of them. I'm going to show you how to make them modular. But we're going to start off with the cutting. Now, when you got boards this big, you'd want to use a proxon if you could, but when they get this big, it gets to be real unwieldy. So you're back to using good old-fashioned methods and a good knife. So the first thing is I suggest to get one of these wide blade knives. These are made by Scotch. I love these. They're the performance line. They're a nice, thick, heavy, wide blade, super sharp, titanium edge. These are really good. These are my choice for a knife rather than, say, an Olfa or whatnot. The blades flop out when you need to, but they're real sturdy. They're also super razor sharp. Now, when cutting foam this thick, remember a couple of points. 1, you're not going to cut through this foam in one first cut. You're going to get a nasty, ugly cut if you do that. 2, you're going to want some sort of guide to cut against. And this is how you're going to get your cut nice and straight. So I'm just going to use the scrap to show how we do this. You want to extend your blade out with a fresh blade, and then you're going to do this in a couple passes. So you've got your place marked, you know where you're going to be at. You start with a light cut just to break that surface, and then go for a second pass, a little deeper, and then one more. And if you're not all the way through, there we go. Look at that. Nice, really clean cut. And that'll be perfectly nice and square. Well done. It's a good cut. So, we've taken 2 pieces of the 1-inch board and we've cut them into 22 by 30-inch boards. So the next step is to rough them up a little bit so they'll be a little bit easier texture and stuff to glue with. You could just use a wire brush. I don't want to score mine all that deeply, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a piece of 60 grit sandpaper and I'm just going to give the whole pink sheet kind of a circular motion and just kind of rough up the surface so that it's something a little bit more porous and a little bit better for the glue and other materials to stick to. So let me quick go do that, and then we'll come back to the next step. All right, crafters, so now we have two nicely put together boards, nicely sanded, so they're nice and roughed up. And now our next step is to add a little subtle texture before we actually add anything to them. We want to add some depth to them. Now, there are a couple ways to do this, and I tested this and I found a method that I like, but you want to do this in a well-ventilated place. I have a fan going and I'm in an open room. Industrial spray bottles are made from a kind of plastic that acetone does not eat through. So what we're going to do is we're going to mist our foam with acetone, and not the entire thing, but just kind of gently mist it. Once it's on there, we're just going to let it dry. Let it do what it does as it eats part of the foam away. And we just want to let it dry overnight. Get rid of the last of the vapor. It doesn't need to look perfect. It doesn't need to look, you know, super spotty. We just want to make it look more organic. So we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back tomorrow after everything is dried and start adding some lifting depth, some sand and some other filler. We're also going to attach our connecting pieces, and we'll talk about that in the next section and how we make it so these don't just slide away from each other. So we'll be back in just a few moments, but it's going to be a full day later for these. Okay, now I just want to quick point out, now that we've got everything nicely dry and hardened up, this was about what we're going for. It's speckled, it's dappled. There are some smaller dents here and there, mostly smaller dents and just some texture. A couple bigger dents that we can put a little extra gooey fluid in when we're making our swamp. You can go overboard. And I want to point out that if you do go overboard, it is fixable. I was doing the second board and I didn't like how textured it was, so I decided to add more. And I added too much, and then I spilled the bottle. And these mistakes will happen. To keep this thing modular though, you gotta keep these walls flat. So we took some sculpt and mold. We've added a side back up. You can see it's kind of textured here. We're gonna be putting a cardboard side on here just to flatten this side back up and make it nice and matched. But now I've got a couple holes that are a lot deeper than I wanted. So if you accidentally do this, you have not ruined your project or this board. The idea is that you make this stuff kind of rough, kind of any place you need to really build up. You make it rough with your sculpt and mold, and then you're going to want to fill these with a bit of something. Since I'm not going to be working on showing how to do resin pours or whatnot, I'm not actually going to fill these with resin or paint the underside because they also just don't look the way I want them to look. I'm going to make them look like they're liquid though, but they're going to be mainly flat. So what's going to happen is I'm going to fill them up with probably with just plaster, just good old-fashioned hydrocal. You can get this at model railroading shops or anywhere that you do any type of sculpting. Don't use regular plaster of Paris. That's going to be too it's going to be too weak. It'll be cracked too easily. It'll pop out too easily. You want something with a higher strength to it. Hydrocal would be a good way to do it. The other way you could do it is if you can get a low temperature glue gun, and it'll probably be like a hole like this. It'll probably be like 5 or 6 sticks. But you take some low temperature glue from a hot glue gun and you fill it up part of the way. So it's got like a lip, but it'll be mainly flat. I may end up doing that. I'm not just deciding yet which I want to do. Depends on how much of this edge I want to preserve. But you're just going to fill it back up, and then when you seal the whole thing and cover it over, you're not worried about that. The glue will take the paint once you put some Mod Podge over the top of it. But when you do fill up, if it went too deep, if you do fill them up, don't fill them to the top or over the top. Leave a lip. Leave just a little bit of an edge of a lip so people can see that it is a downgoing degradation in the land. Just a quick tip there if you've done a big D and gone a little overboard in trying to get what matches your mind to what you want to see on the board. So I'm going to fill up some holes, and then we're going to come back and showing how we're going to raise some areas of texture. Okay, crafters. So the next part of getting these all together is to create some sort of jig so that when you do these in the future, when you do more boards, you make everything exactly the same. You could just do a measured amount. I like having a little jig because I like to have that little visual notice on where things are, and that way I can make it the same for all the way around the board. So I've just taken a piece of the foam that's squared off, same size, and I've cut it to the length I want. And then all we're going to do is we're going to butt it up with the end, and then where you see that it's butted up, you're just going to mark a small line. And you're going to do that on both sides of all the corners. Now, the next step is you're going to have to look at the board like you're looking at the face of it. So the right side is where we're going to put our magnet. You're going to dig a small hole out the size of one of these metal or ceramic refrigerator magnets. They're strong enough to hold things together, but they're not going to be wrenching strength. The big thing is you could use neodymium. They're going to wrench because they got a really hard grip. And if you use the rubberized flexible ones, they won't really grip very well. So I suggest getting the ceramic ones. I think that's what these are. And you're going to just dig a little bit into the foam. Use a tool. I'm going to use a Dremel and just dig a little bit in the hole, just so this sits right on the surface. On the opposite side, you're just going to put a washer down. Just a little bit of white glue, put the washer down, a little bit of hot glue in the bottom of this, and glue it in place. So let me dig this out and get these in place, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so here we see I've got them in place. I'm going to separate them, and you can see it doesn't take a lot of force to pull them apart, but it will hold them in place for playing a game nice and firmly, so the boards don't slide all over the place. Now again, when we're done and about ready to Mod Podge the whole thing, I'm also going to take a roll of painter's tape or masking tape and go all the way around this piece. So that's going to give a piece of covering so these don't pop out or pull out. Plus it'll give, once the Mod Podge soaks into the paper tape, it'll make it hard with that little bit of lacquer that's in Mod Podge and give your borders a nice tough side so they don't mess up as easily. But now that since you've got them all set up in the exact same configuration, You can rotate the boards, and you can set up in any direction and put them in any which way, especially if you have like 4 or 6 or multiple different kinds. And as long as you use the same jig, they'll all just snap together and keep themselves a nice, neat board. All right, so let me go grab my sandbox and my glue. I'm going to go over the sand we're going to put on the surface. Remember, we're not going to be putting on too much. We want this board to stay mostly flat, but we just want to add some variation. So I'll be right back. Okay, crafters, so we got some water. We've got some nice mixed grade sand, play sand, or construction sand is what they call it. I think this is specifically, yeah, I think this is construction sand. So it's a couple of nice mixed grits. And then we've got some nice strong PVA. I'm using Eileen's Tacky, pretty much my favorite glue. Now we're not going to go crazy. We don't want to put a ton on here, like I said. What we want to do is we want to look at where we've got some indentations, and then wherever there's open areas near them, we want to basically add to their terrain. So we're just going to add a little glue here. Take a wet brush. And then just add a little bit of grit and sand to it. And we're just going to go around the board, going from place to place in here, finding spots that they could use just a little bit of extra terrain help. Wet our junky brush, and again, just smooth it out. And we're just adding a little bit here and there. We're not looking to remake the map. And you don't want to have high edges. I mean, you want to use the wet brush to kind of smooth down the edges. And you would do this in a few places on the board, any place where you just think that you could use a little bit of more detail. There's nothing scientific, this is all to taste. I'm going to probably have like 6 or 7 spots like that on here. Let it dry overnight. Shake your leftover sand back in your container. And then you're going to wrap your tape around the edge and give the whole thing a coat of your Mod Podge or black paint. And then we're going to come back and talk about painting the ground to look like a swamp. So I'm going to crack on here, and we'll see you once this is all dry. Our black is down, everything's nice and primed, we've got everything nice and dry. We got a nice solid piece to work with. So we're going to do our base coats. Now there's not a lot to this, but we want to make it feel swampy and icky and ugly and gross. So what we're going to do is we're mainly working with 2 colors of paint. I've got the craft paints. I went and grabbed Americana dark chocolate, but any kind of a dark chocolatey brown will work. And then I grabbed from Craft Smart olive green. So any sort of an olive drab will work. So basically your main color is your brown, and the secondary color is green. Now what you're doing is you're taking the green and you're roughly getting it into your lower areas. And it's okay if it's not perfect, and it's okay if it's not solid. You want it to not be, you don't want to see brush strokes. So you might have to do 1 or 2 coats. But it doesn't have to be perfectly even. It can be nice and patchy. Now at the same time, you don't care if you kind of run over, because you're also going to be taking this chocolatey brown and you're just kind of coating everything with this chocolatey brown. So as you can see, it gets into the green there, and you're just taking a little bit more of the green and getting into the low areas with it. And then again, going back over with that chocolatey brown. And this is a very rough, icky, terrainy type paint scheme. So don't worry if your paints get all kind of mushy on each other and they're blending to each other. You're making a sickly landscape. So if your green gets in your brown, or your brown gets in your green, and there's some patchiness here and there, that's okay, because that's all going to add to the decay-like look that you're going for with these boards. So go ahead, get in there, get your brown down, get your green down. And then let it dry. I'm going to hit up these two boards. We're going to get a good look at them, and then when they're dry, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about doing our dry brushing. So we'll be back. All right, crafters. Well, next stage is some dry brushing. So you're going to want to get something to wipe your dry brush off, because we're going to do this just like you would any other normal dry brushing. You're going to want to get a big soft brush, and we're using Craft Smart Golden Brown, because I wanted to stay in the browns. I didn't want to go to a gray or to a white, like a beige even. I wanted to keep this kind of a muddy, dirty brown. So we're going to get some on our brush here. Again, we're going to wipe most of it off. And then start from an edge. And we're just dry brushing this to get some definition to what it is we're doing. We're going to be adding a lot of flock, but the idea is to just look at all this terrain we've built and all this nice detail, and we want to just kind of bring out the high and low areas. So as you can see, not heavy, not a lot, just enough to kind of bring out some definition on it. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do these two. We're going to let that dry. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about flocking. So we'll be back. All right, look how great that dry brushing came out. Really pops these boards and makes them feel just alive. Just a really, really great look. And a little bit of brown, just amazing. So the next step is we're going to be adding our flock. So I've got some Woodland Scenics coarse turf, and I'm going with a light green because it's kind of like a sickly green, and I've just got a simple shaker bottle. And you're going to want to take some good old-fashioned Mod Podge, and you're going to work in smaller areas, but you're basically going to put glue down over the flatter areas, again matching the contours that you built up, because we're not flocking everything, but you just want to work in small areas, and then put just a light shaking of your flock. Over the area. As you go. And when you're done, you're just going to shake off your excess and put it back in your container. So just continue on. And again, because you want to make sure it gets on the glue when the glue is nice and wet and very tacky. You want to work in small areas. Don't try to do all the board at once. Don't try to do even a huge area once. You know, just small areas. And keep at it. So we're going to continue on. I've given you a good example of what we're doing. Give you an idea there. You want to work at once. And we're going to keep at it. And we will come back when this is dry. All right, folks. So we are now down to the last of the flocking portion. We're going to be putting down some glue. We want to make sure that you don't make a mess, so we're going to take one of the boards off. And we're just going to sit here with one board over the plastic that I laid down. And now we got what I call our flocking glue or our terrain glue. And it's basically 4-to-1 Mod Podge, 1 part Mod Podge, 4 parts water. And we just put it in a spray bottle. And we're just spraying everything down. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some finely blended turf, and I'm going to use just the earth blend, which has greens and browns. And I'm not going to put a lot of this on here. We're just going to gently shake a dusting over the board. While the glue is drying. And because it's foam, it'll suck it up, but it'll add some patches of color, and it'll also add a little bit of texture. Like I said, you don't want to go nuts, but you just want to gently sprinkle it over the board just to add some nice variety. All right, we're gonna let this dry, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna add some water to the whole thing. So we'll be back once this dries. All right, crafters. So scenic glue is dry. Yeah, it's actually dried. What I did was afterwards, there's no point in filming it, just to let you know, after the scenic glue dries, the next step is to take either a satin or a semi-gloss lacquer, like this, and give the whole board a heavy coat of it, just to make it look nice and wet. It's going to be a sloppy, messy bog. So then after that, the last 2 steps are we're going to go into the boggy sections where they're down a little bit, and we're going to add a little depth. We're going to put a layer of gloss Mod Podge in there, let it dry, put another layer, probably do 2, 3, 4 layers in any of these holes, just to let it look like there's some standing water, although it's mainly just boggy moss. You could go and do something like water effects, or you could use resin. I think the Mod Podge will be perfectly fine by itself. We don't want it to look like it's moving. We want it to look nice and static. So that self-leveling and just smoothing will make it just look like there's wet, stagnant puddles. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to add some tufts. And it doesn't matter. You could use some Citadel Tufts, or you could use Army Painter, or you can use Woodland Scenics. But you want to add about 8 to 10 Tufts per board just to break things up and to really just add a little bit more interest and spice to the board. So I'm going to do that. We're going to add some Mod Podge and some of these bigger ones and just really make this board look like a fetid swamp. And when it's done, we're going to come back and throw an army on here and show you what we got. So we'll be right back.
All right, crafters, check it out. This is a complete incursion-sized board with 1,000 points of Death Guard on it and a bunch of terrain, just to give you an idea of scale. We ran some games on it this weekend, and let me tell you, this is the definition of an epic battlefield. It's not a difficult tutorial, not hard to build, but the results are amazing. I hope you got something from this tutorial. I hope you found it enjoyable, and I hope you try tackling this project yourself. If you found this enjoyable, please hit like, share, and subscribe. Go ahead and throw your comments down below. I'd love to see what you think. I'd also love to see what you'd like to see me tackle next. For now, though, I'm Big D. Game on.